So here I'm going to provide translation and commentary on a famous poem by Hafez. The poem is composed of only 10 lines, but it'll be a relatively long video because, reading and understanding Hafez is an advanced task. But I intend this video to be accessible to a relatively broad audience. So in this video, I assume you have intermediate knowledge of Persian, most likely contemporary Persian, and you like to get a grasp of what Hafez's poetry feels like in Persian. Of course, reading translations is usually not very helpful for this purpose because translations don't stop to tell you, explicitly about all the wordplays and cultural references that are going on and so on. A commentary like this is the only thing that can unpack a Persian poem for someone who's not well versed in Persian literature. So my translations here are not supposed to be beautiful. They're supposed to help you understand the Persian version of the poem for yourself. I pronounced the poem, of course, in my contemporary Tehrani accent, but of course, as you know, Hafez's pronunciation would have been quite different. And a few words about Hafez himself before we start. Hafez is the most popular poet in Iran today, and quite popular in Afghanistan and Tajikistan as well. It has become rather cliche to repeat that almost every Persian-speaking household owns a copy of Hafez, but it's also probably true and informative. So he lived in the 14th century CE in Persia, that's some 700 years ago. To put it in context, that's towards the end of the Middle Ages in Europe. So, 100 Years' War, the Black Death, and in Asia you have Timur's military expeditions, especially in Persia. Hafez's poetry is a combination of love and mysticism. And, mystic literature itself is intensely preoccupied with love. But Hafez's poetry is more complicated than that. In Persian mystic poetry, or Sufi poetry as you may want to call it, there's always talk of music, wine, the beauty of the face of the beloved, yearning for a kiss, etc. These are things that show up in many forms of lyric poetry throughout the world. But in mystical poetry, these images are used metaphorically to refer to spiritual concepts, so they're often taken to have moved away from their literal meanings. In fact, many of the poets from this tradition are well-known Muslim religious figures who are very unlikely to have been into wine drinking and going after attractive young people and boasting about it especially. But in the case of more mysterious figures like Hafez, it's sometimes difficult to tell whether we're dealing with ordinary lyric poetry, which definitely did exist in Persian literature, or the symbolic language of the mystics, who were just a minority, at least up to some point in the history of Persian literature. Or perhaps you can look at Hafez's poems as an intentional exploitation of both of these motifs as tools to create wonderful poetry in which literary beauty takes priority over, everything else. In any case, the poem we're dealing with today has a very clear mystical atmosphere, as we'll see shortly. So let's start reading the lines one by one and discuss them in terms of both form and meaning. سالها دل طلب جام-e-jam از ما می کرد وانچه خود داشت ز بیگانه تمنا می کرد. So let's begin with a couple of points about form and language. As you know, Persian has a thing for compound verbs. So you can take something like the noun talab, originally from Arabic, meaning demand, and put it next to the verb kardan, to do, to create the compound verb talab kardan, to demand. Now, in this poem, we'll see this a lot. The verb mikard, meaning used to do or did, appears at the end of every line, and in this particular line, every half line as well. It's not the rhyme word. The rhyme word is the word before it. So here we have ma and tamanna as the rhyme words, and they end in a throughout the whole poem. Now let's switch gears and focus on meaning. For years, my heart demanded the cup of jam from us, that is, from me, and what it already had demanded from others. The cup of jam is a magical object in Iranian mythology. Jam is, of course, short for Jamshid. You could look inside this cup and see the truth, or see what was going on in the world. or something that you didn't know you wanted to know, or something to that effect. In some ways, this is similar to the crystal balls of the soothsayers in Western cultures. So anyway, in Hafez's poetry, we may say that jām-e-jam sometimes refers simply to the cup of wine because of its magical, truth-revealing properties, sometimes to the pure heart of the mystic, and perhaps most commonly it can vaguely refer to both at once. And of course, it can always also vaguely refer to the original magical object as well. So back to this line, what is Hafez telling us in this line? It talks about how you seek something that you already have. It's a pretty common trope in mystic literature. It can be seen in Rumi and Attar. It can be seen even outside the Islamic world. It's even entered Western pop culture. So you go around the world looking for something, but it's right over there in front of you, or better yet, as in this case, you already possess it. Your heart is the one demanding to have jām-e-jam, and your heart already has it. I guess the most straightforward mystical interpretation is that your heart is looking for means to achieve purity in reunion with the divine, whereas no external means are ever required for that. Perhaps, no specific rituals, no particular formulas, no systematic forms of austerity. You already have what it takes to get there. گوهری که از صدف کون و مکان بیرون است طلب از گمشدگان لب دریا می کرد. So a few linguistic notes here. First of all, the word sadaf could mean oyster or oyster shell. It's the thing that contains pearls. So there's a lot of reference to how oysters produce pearls in Persian poetry. And lab darya, it's the lip of the sea, but idiomatically it means the shore of the sea or the beach. So the pearl that is outside of the shell of existence and space, my heart was demanding it. My heart was demanding this pearl from those who were lost on the shore. Where are you supposed to look for pearls? In oysters, of course, which are in the ocean. But this pearl, this particular pearl, is beyond existence and space. And yet, where is my heart looking for it? Not even in the ocean, where at least ordinary pearls can be found, but on the shore. And not by asking those on the shore who know what they're doing, but from people who are lost on the shore. مشکل خویش بر پیر-e-moghān بردم دوش کو به تأیید نظر حل معما می کرد. مشکل خویش, that is the problem of myself, that simply means my problem, I took to the elder of the Magi, pir-e-moghān, we'll talk about that in a moment, who would solve problems through tأیید nazar. So tأیید means assistance. Modern Persian speakers might think it means confirmation, but definitely not the meaning that is intended here. And nazar means a glance, a look, not opinion, which is the more common modern meaning again. So بتأیید نظر حل معما میکرد is that with the help of his looks, or simply by virtue of looking, through looking, he would solve problems. So I took my problem to the elder of the Magi, who would solve problems by making a glance. The Magi are Zoroastrian priests. The elder of the Magi is basically the Zoroastrian high priest. In Persian poetry, however, since wine is almost exclusively sold by religious minorities in that era, the elder of the Magi gradually came to be associated with wine drinking. So this figure is usually found in taverns in Persian poetry, not in Zoroastrian temples. This figure has found its own connotations and meaning in Persian, and especially mystical Persian poetry. In Hafez's poetry, the elder of the Magi is a real sage, as opposed to Muslim figures such as the Mufti and the Zahid, who are typically portrayed as charlatans. Now, this type of imagery in Persian mystic poetry, which didn't really start with Hafez, by the way, definitely must have been provocative in the beginning, at least. Imagine a predominantly Muslim Persia where poets start talking about the Zoroastrian priest as the sage and Muslim figures as the bad guys. But over time, such poetry became so common that it gradually lost its effectiveness through overuse. To the extent that today you can even see hardliner Iranian clerics reading these poems and enjoying them without batting an eye. No one considers them even slightly offensive. So anyway, Hafez takes his problem to the elder of the Magi. And what is his problem? It's the unreasonable demand that his heart is making. He probably wants to know how to get a jām-e-jam for himself, right? دیدمش خرم و خندان قدح باده به دست واندران آینه صد گونه تماشا میکرد. I saw him, joyful and smiling, with a cup of wine in his hand, and he was throwing 100 types of glances, صد گونه تماشا میکرد, or he was looking at it in 100 ways. Looking at what? At that mirror. What mirror, you may ask? By that mirror, Hafez here means the cup of wine in the hand of the elder of the Magi. So, long story short, Hafez enters the place where he can find the elder of the Magi. He sees him with a cup of wine, smiling, seems happy, and he's looking at this mirror that is his cup of wine. Of course, if you look at a cup of wine, you can see your own reflection, so you can see why it's called a mirror. And of course, deeper interpretations of that can be made pretty easily. گفتم این جام جهان بین به تو کی داد حکیم گفت آن روز که این گنبد مینا می کرد. A couple of linguistic points to note here. First of all, گنبد مینا means the blue dome or the green dome, or the dome that was made from the green bluish material that is called mina. So the blue dome is basically the sky. And the second linguistic note related to this is that mikad here, unlike the rest of the poem, doesn't mean did, it means made. So an roz ke in gumbad mina mikad means the day when he was creating the sky or the heavens, practically creating the entire world. So the line says, I said, when did the wise one give you this world-seeing cup? He said, that day when he was creating this blue dome. Now the word hakim, the wise one, in general it means wise, but here it certainly means God. And God has been described using this adjective in the Quran quite a few times. Jām-e-jam, the world-seeing cup, is just another name for jām-e-jam. The two names are used interchangeably by Hafez and by other poets as well. So Hafez asks the elder of the Magi, when did God give you this cup of jam? This question, of course, has a nice ambiguity. We just read in the previous line that the elder of the Magi had a cup of wine in his hand, so Hafez could be referring to this cup when he says, this cup of jam. But then a few lines before that, we saw that Hafez was interested in the whereabouts of the actual cup of jam, or perhaps the purity of heart that is referred to metaphorically as the cup of jam. He wanted one such cup for his own heart, you remember. We also know from elsewhere that Hafez generally uses cup of jam to mean any of these things. So the ambiguity is definitely intended here. Anyway, he asks the elder of the Magi when he got the cup. And the answer is quite clear. God gave the cup to the elder of the Magi the very day he created heavens. So it's always been with him. This is another reference to the theme of the opening line. The cup of jam is with you since the beginning. You don't go get it. It's already there, right? بیدلی در همه احوال خدا با او بود. او نمیدیدش را از دور خدایا میکرد. A restless man, or literally a heartless man, God was with him on all occasions, or in all situations. Yet he wouldn't see him, and he would keep saying, "Oh God," from afar. خدایا میکرد is literally he did, "Oh God," and it virtually means he kept saying, "Oh God," from afar, or as if he's far away. So if we take the previous verses to mean what we think they mean, I may say that here, in a surprisingly direct rephrasing of what the poem has been telling us so far metaphorically, the poem is now telling us explicitly that God can be with you, and yet you may keep looking for him in remote places. Anyway, note that it looks like it's still the elder of the Magi talking. The quotation has not ended. این همه شعبده خویش که می کرد اینجا سامری پیش عصا و ید بیضا می کرد. So you see, I'm reading it as if Samari is the subject of the first half line as well. Here I'm following Bahauddin Khorramshahi. So it's a difficult line, and it says, all the deception that Samari did here, and we'll talk about who Samari was, he did it in the presence of the staff of Moses and the bright hand of Moses. So the line has a clear reference to the story of Moses. He had two famous miracles in the Islamic tradition, the staff, which is well known to Westerners as well because it's found in the Hebrew Bible, and the bright hand, which I think is specific to the Quran. I don't want to talk about it right now, but Samiri was the guy who deceived Moses' followers into worshipping the calf instead of God. So the elder of the Magi is now telling us that all of the deceptions Samiri did was in the presence of Moses' true miracles. And well, deceptions are definitely defeated when confronted with true miracles. Now, how does this connect to the rest of the poem? Not easily, I'd say. In most of Hafez's poems, the lines don't really follow a cohesive plot. So much so that it's quite common to see the lines recorded in different orders in different manuscripts, or see some lines missing in different manuscripts of Hafez's poems. But in this particular poem, a general storyline was followed up to this point. However, connecting this line, as well as perhaps the following lines, to the rest of the poem is not that easy. It's perhaps doable, but I won't give it a try. In any case, in all likelihood, it's still the elder of the Magi speaking, and it's as if he's giving some advice to Hafez, some general advice regarding purity of heart and salvation. گفت آن یار که از او گشت سر دار بلند جرمش این بود که اسرار هویدا می کرد. He said that friend of ours, or that fella by whom the gallows were honored, his crime was that he revealed secrets. So when someone has a high head, سر بلند, in Persian, idiomatically even today, it means that the person is honored or is proud. So here he's playing with the words. The gallows, it might be worth reminding you that gallows are the structures that are used for hanging criminals. So Hafez is talking about someone who was hanged. We'll talk about that person shortly. And he's saying by the fact that his head was moved up the gallows were in fact honored. And the second half line says, his crime was that he revealed secrets. So again, he said that friend of ours by whom the gallows were honored, his crime was that he revealed secrets. This line is talking about Hallaj. Hallaj was a Muslim mystical figure who lived a few centuries before Hafez and was hanged by Muslim fanatics for having said things they found blasphemous. In the Arabic-speaking world, as far as I know, he's a controversial figure. In the Persian world, however, he's largely revered. This, I'd say, is not only because of the general popularity of mysticism in the Persian world, but also directly influenced by how Hallaj is portrayed in Persian literature, which of course is in turn vastly influenced by mystic discourse. So back to Hafez's line, Hallaj's blasphemous words, according to the elder of the Magi, were secrets revealed by him. So he was killed, according to Hafez, because he revealed secrets. Again, this is a common theme in mystical literature. The mystic apparently sees truths that he shall not reveal to the public. Or perhaps he's allowed to reveal them as far as God is concerned, but there will be worldly consequences. The elder of the Magi is making another point here, perhaps warning Hafez about what to say and what not to say if he obtains what he wants. فیض روح القدس ار باز مدد فرماید دیگران هم بکنند آنچه مسیحا میکرد. If the grace of the Holy Spirit helps again, others too will do what the Messiah did. We must note that Jesus, or the Messiah as Muslims call him too, is not God but a prophet in mainstream Muslim belief. This is taken for granted, so I don't think you should read this line as if he's making a point about Jesus in particular. The point here is divine grace. The idea is that Jesus received divine grace through the Holy Spirit which is not a surprising idea as far as I can tell for a 14th century Sunni Muslim. So this line seems to be yet another general advice by the elder of the Magi, this time pointing out, roughly speaking, that salvation comes through grace. Or to make a more minimal interpretation, that what makes Messiah and any other holy figure special is divine grace. گفتمش سلسله زلف بتان از پی چیست؟ گفت حافظ گله ای از دل شیدا می کرد. So the dialogue between Hafez and the elder of the Magi goes on. Here it says, I told him, what is the purpose of the chain of the hair of the beautiful ones? Silsile zulf botan literally means the chain of the hair of the idols. But idols has come to mean beautiful people in Persian poetry. So he's asking, what's the purpose of those chains? And the answer he gets is, he said, گفت حافظ گله ای از دل شیدا می کرد. Hafez was complaining or making a complaint about his crazy heart. So it might be worth noting that the word silsile means not just a metal chain, but any long sequence of items or knots. And it's a common word for referring to long hair. It's seen elsewhere as well in Persian poetry. So Hafez asks the elder of the Magi what those long hairs are for, and the response is quite interesting. Chains were of course used for tying up the mentally ill, or some of them, the ones that were thought to be dangerous. Over time, chains became a symbol of craziness. So if you've lost your mind, we should look for chains for you. A common theme in Persian even today, where دیوانه زنجیری, roughly meaning crazy with a chain, is used as a pejorative term. So back to the response of the elder of the Magi, he's telling Hafez that those chains are for your heart. You said your heart is crazy, so that's what these chains are for. Here, we seem to be back on track with the general plot of the poem. The poem started with Hafez complaining about his heart's unreasonable demand. The poem ends with the elder of the Magi pointing out that Hafez's heart must be chained by the long hairs of beautiful youth. This becomes more interesting when we note that a heart being trapped in someone's hair is a very common image for love in Persian poetry. So if A loves B, the Persian poet might say, A's heart is trapped in B's hair. So the poem seems to end by suggesting that what is apt for Hafez's heart is simply to fall in love. Now before ending this video, I'd like to read the poem once again from the beginning to the end. And I try to read it in a way that you can feel to some extent the rhythm of the poem. Of course, it's metrical poetry, so it's rhythmic to the ear of the Persian speaker.
سالها دل طلب جام از ما می کرد وانچه خود داشت ز بیگانه تمنا می کرد گوهری که از صدف کون و مکان بیرون است طلب از گمشدگان لب دریا می کرد مشکل خویش بر پیر-e-moghān بردم دوش کو به تأیید نظر حل معما می کرد دیدمش خرم و خندان قدح باده به دست واندر آینه صد گونه تماشا می کرد گفتم این جام جهان بین به تو کی داد حکیم گفت آن روز که این گنبد مینا می کرد بیدلی در همه احوال خدا با او بود او نمی دیدش و از دور خدایا می کرد این همه شعبده خویش که می کرد اینجا سامری پیش عصا و ید بیضا می کرد گفت آن یار که از او گشت سر دار بلند جرمش این بود که اسرار هویدا می کرد فیض روح القدس ار باز مدد فرماید دیگران هم بکنند آنچه مسیحا می کرد گفتمش سلسله زلف بتان از پی چیست گفت حافظ گله ای از دل شیدا می کرد